Brooklyn has a bit more space than Manhattan, and there is a lot more to see while you're doing outdoor stuff than in the other boroughs, just because of the water line. Brooklyn, as you might see on a map, has a lot of coast. I mean, it's surrounded by a few rivers, and inside, even as I mentioned, there's lakes in Prospect Park. So I think the fact that you can have land and water at one time makes being here really special.
Hey, this is Cindy Scott from Cinder's Travels. Welcome to the Locals Know Best podcast. This is episode 20. Locals Know Best is a bi-weekly podcast where my guests share the places and outdoor travel adventures they love most, right in their own backyards. Topics range from unique lodging options, treasured outdoor activities, favorite dining spots, and a breakdown of whether the Insta-famous and possibly overrated spots in town are even worth checking out. Today, I'll be speaking with New York City native Becca Siegel about how to make the most of a day outdoors in Brooklyn, New York. Becca is a traveler, adventurer, content creator, and travel lifestyle writer who aims to inspire professionals to be adventurous and confident through remote work, travel, and entrepreneurship. She has spent several stints living abroad, starting with her semester in Hong Kong as a college junior, which introduced her to the idea of traveling and exploring the world. She lived in Shanghai, China for 2 years as an expat and traveler, and more recently traveled to 5 continents with her husband Dan to work remotely from all different types of environments while running their business. Her background in foreign languages, both Spanish and Chinese, teaching, living abroad, and travel helped her to create the lifestyle brand Half Half Travel with her husband Dan. Her creations have been featured in Cosmopolitan, Insider, Lonely Planet, Oprah Magazine, and Condé Nast Traveler. She loves to inspire travelers to visit New York City, and especially Brooklyn. If you want to follow along with links to all the places we're talking about and a map of the area, this episode's show notes can be found at localsknowbestpodcast.com/20. As always, thanks so much for listening. Let's get into the episode. Hi, Becca. Thanks so much for being here with me today.
Hi, what a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
I am really looking forward to tackling a big topic today, I think, Brooklyn. How long have you been in Brooklyn? What makes you an expert on Brooklyn?
I grew up visiting my grandparents in Brooklyn most weekends when I was a kid. Growing up in Queens, Brooklyn was essentially around the corner, although nothing was really around the corner in New York, so it was always an hour drive. But I grew up going to Brooklyn on the weekends, to a very different part of Brooklyn that tourists do not usually go to. So I like to say I know a lot of the parts of Brooklyn. But I've been living in Brooklyn since 2017, and I've lived in, I want to say, three different neighborhoods, moving to a fourth in 2 weeks. So pretty well-rounded.
Yeah, okay. So I lived in Astoria, which, of course, is not in Brooklyn, is in Queens, for about a year, a while back. And one of the problems I had, first of all, I was very poor when I lived there. But second of all, I didn't have a car. And I just felt really kind of clammed up a lot of the time. So tell us, for people in that same situation, is getting outside affordable, accessible, those kind of things?
Totally. I think spending time outside is one of the most affordable things you can do, especially as a traveler here. And in these really incredible days of COVID-19 and spending a lot of time outside due to the need, but also because it's so amazing to get outside when you've been home and working from home, so much of what we do here is free. Meaning I'll go take a bike ride, I'll go for a run, my husband and I will go for walks, or we'll meet up with friends for walks. We'll go sit in the park, and that's free. You can go do yoga in the park, and that's free. I love watching the sunset from some of my favorite spots. That's free. I love walking on the bridges to Manhattan and then walking back, and that's free. So it's actually hard. I mean, people might say like, what? You're crazy. But I find it hard to spend money sometimes.
I do think that's crazy. But I will say there are amazing ways to be cheap in New York that don't exist in other big cities. Like, I remember there was almost always a bar that had like dollar beers every night of the week. Like, you could always find something like that. Because I was a lot younger.
And I was going to say, Cindy, what year did you live here?
When was this? 2008. So now they're probably I don't know, $5 beers. I don't know. But there are ways that I don't think exist as much in other big cities. But anyways, for an adventurous, outdoorsy person, what should be bringing us to Brooklyn?
I love this question. I think big misconceptions about New York is that a lot of people have seen Manhattan in the movies. And if you've seen Manhattan in the movies, you think, oh, skyscrapers, Times Square, Central Park, very outdoorsy, sure. But a lot of people want to see the museums and they want to eat at the restaurants and they want to do all these things that tend to be inside, actually. But if you go out of the big urban center, if you leave the financial district and you leave essentially a lot of Manhattan, when you get to Brooklyn, which is one of the 5 boroughs of New York, there are beaches, there are parks, there's actually hiking, which I'll get to later in this episode. There are bike rentals, there are miles of bike paths, there are boat rentals. And I mean, I've seen people do all sorts of sports here. Actually, during COVID, which is still now, but it was the last 14 months of our lives. I went to the park one day, the park in my neighborhood, and I counted people doing 12 different outdoor activities, from yoga to Tai Chi to running up and down the large stairs to group dance classes, all outside, because that is the common space that we have as Brooklynites to do our exercise and our enjoyment of the outdoors. So I'll be delighted to talk more about all of these outdoor things, Cindy.
Yeah. Have you been finding yourself spending more time outdoors in the last year or so?
Tons. I was never a runner before, but in 2020, starting in July, I ran 200 miles, which is a personal achievement, but it's also a way that I got out and I got to learn more about the streets of where I live within a 2 to 3 to 4 mile radius of where I live. And I got to enjoy the bridges and take photos, and I got to enjoy the parks. And I got to just really enjoy my city and my borough and the neighboring neighborhoods through running and biking last year. So this has been an amazing way to spend time outside and also kind of like to feel like a tourist in your own city, to always be seeing something new.
Tell us, what neighborhood are you living in currently? And is that the same neighborhood we're going to be talking about, or what neighborhoods are we going to go through on this episode?
Sure. So there are lots of neighborhoods within very close proximity to each other, just due to the innate density of New York City. I live in an area called Fort Greene, which many people have never heard of. And actually, for many years living in Manhattan, I had not heard of Fort Greene. It has a place on the map because it has some famous places like BAM, which is the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Now there's an Apple store here, so that's kind of like on the map. We're near the Barclays Center. There are some famous poets that lived in the neighborhood. There's some Revolutionary War history in this neighborhood. But above all, Fort Greene is really known for its beautiful architecture, a lot of it coming from the 1800s, beautiful brownstones, some even really, how do I describe this? There are some like Victorian homes here, and a lot of things are really well preserved. We also have a beautiful park that was designed by the same architects as Central Park, Olmsted and Vaux, very famous architects here in New York who've done obviously really great things for the city and for tourism. So there's a lot of things that put this neighborhood on the map. And I think we'll mention this neighborhood in our tour today, but we'll also be talking about Brooklyn Heights, where I lived from 2017 to 2018.
Okay, great. If we're going to go visit, when is the best time of year to go to Brooklyn? And maybe when is a time that should be avoided?
So I would definitely say avoid January and February, as it tends to snow. 2 years ago, we got hardly any snow, and this year it snowed, I think, 3 times in 3 weeks. So we had a whole bunch of snow, and it didn't melt until it was like 55 degrees and raining. New York is beautiful in the snow, but as any New Yorker would say, the snow is only pretty for a few hours until the cars start coming and it starts turning black and yellow and all these other colors that the snow tends to turn. So I would say the best months to come here we actually had a very nice March this year, I want to say. So anytime between March and November are great times to come to New York. People like to come for Christmas, for December, but honestly, I don't really like the cold. Now with doing everything outside, I forced myself to enjoy the cold. But if you need to come in December, you can do it. I would say avoid January and February.
Okay. And for our day that we're going to be doing right now, that we're going to jump into in just a moment, what time of year do you think this is? Does it work anytime between March to November?
It does work anytime between March and November. For anyone who comes from like a part of the world that's a bit more south where the sun tends to set more consistently, what I will say is that in the beginning of March, we'll have like a 5 p.m. sunset, but then the clocks change and we get a 6 p.m. by now. So it's like we're recording in middle of April, the sun sets at 7:30. And then by the middle of June, it won't get dark till about 9 p.m. So that's a really long day. You know, you can just enjoy the outdoors for so many daylight hours in June here.
All right, well, let's start it off. And if we're not going to be crashing with you, where will we be waking up?
Yeah, I would say there are so many cool places to Airbnb or stay in like a little hotel, I guess, in this like 2-mile radius around here, kind of stemming out from Brooklyn Heights and Dumbo, which are two of the neighborhoods near the bridges. So if you stay in like an Airbnb, and I'm going to rattle off a few neighborhoods for people, but Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, Park Slope, Prospect Heights, Fort Greene, Navy Yard, Dumbo, Vinegar Hill, downtown Brooklyn, or where else? I don't know, any of these places, Crown Heights, whatever tickles your fancy in terms of budget and what you'd like to be around. I would say you can stay in any of those places. We're going to start our tour in Brooklyn Heights, where I used to live.
Okay, great. So we're starting off our day. We're waking up from our Airbnb or our hotel. And where are we going to go for breakfast or coffee?
Ooh, I think we should go to Joe Coffee in Brooklyn Heights. It's a little coffee shop. There are a few locations of Joe around, but this one is on a beautiful tree-lined historic street, just a few steps away from the Brooklyn Heights Promenade. So we're going to take our coffee, maybe take our croissant or our muffin, and we're going to go sit and we're going to watch the day begin in the Brooklyn Heights Promenade, which has one of the most unobstructed views of Lower Manhattan and the skyline. So that's a beautiful place to go.
Perfect. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've seen our view and had our coffee. What is the first big outdoor activity we're going to go do?
I think we're going to go rent bikes. And what we can start to do is we can get those bikes. We can rent City Bikes, which is a bike share here in New York. If anybody wants to check out the City Bike app, it's CITI Bike on the App Store. And if you Google NYC City Bike, CITI Bike, you can find out how to rent them for the day as a traveler. They have an affordable option where you can get a day pass, or you could probably get a week pass if you're here for a while. I have the unlimited year, so that's been really great for getting around, especially being outside all the time. And essentially, Brooklyn Bridge Park is a pretty massive park that lines the water on the East River between Manhattan and Brooklyn. And there is a bike path from the bottom of the park, which starts around a neighborhood called Cobble Hill. And it goes all the way to Dumbo, which is near the Manhattan Bridge. So by biking through this park, we'll be able to see all of the piers, which have been turned into, some have sporting fields. There's a pier that has a soccer field. There's a pier that has handball courts. There's a little man-made beach that we can pass and dip our feet in the water if you dare. And then we can park the bikes and we can walk around some of the green areas. There are playgrounds for children. We can grab ice cream. And then what we need to do is get your camera ready, because at the old Pier 1, it's where the bottoms of the docks remain, like the poles that come out of the water, but the docks themselves have been ripped up. And this is a really Instagrammable spot to take a picture of the skyline.
Oh, nice. So we started our day off with the biking, and then what's next?
So now we're going to do a bit of walking. So our our sporting events for the day are biking, walking, and hiking. So now we're into the walking. And there's also photography. That's a sport in my book. So we're going to be in Dumbo by this point, where we're going to leave our bikes. And now I want to take you walking. We're going to walk back down through a park called Cadman Park. We're going to get into downtown Brooklyn, which there isn't much to see. It just looks like a city. But what's really beautiful is we're going to get into Cobble Hill and Court Street, and then we're going to walk through the historic homes and the tree-lined streets of an area called Burham Hill, which is where I'll be moving at the end of this month.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting. And so what does that neighborhood look like?
So it has a lot of brick row homes that are also built in the brownstone style. And for anyone who doesn't know, brownstones are I read about this, which is why I know. Brownstones are very innate to New York City because when they were being built for the wealthy upper classes back in the 1850s to 1890s, the brownstone was taken from New Jersey and Connecticut. And they basically built these row houses that are all built in a row. So you won't see any space between them. And that's what's so unique about it. But they're usually anywhere between 2 to 4 stories. And some of them are single family homes, but some of them have been turned into apartments. So that's why the area looks the way it does. And a lot of it has been beautifully preserved. So I really recommend taking photos of these streets with all the perspectives and also looking at all of the details that people will have, like the plants they set out front and the different types of doors they might choose. And some of them have really beautiful redone windows. So it's a sight to see.
Are we having lunch in that neighborhood, or did I accidentally pass lunch?
You didn't pass lunch. I think what we get to do from Durham Hill is we get to walk to Fort Greene, where I live. So we're going to walk into Fort Greene, and where are we going to eat? There is a pizza place. You don't want to miss New York pizza. And this is near a good intersection called Fulton and Lafayette. And there's a lot to do around there. There's Turkish food, there's pizza. There is actually, I guess we might as well go to my favorite Thai restaurant, which is called National, just the word National. And that's at the crossroads of Fulton and Lafayette. It's great. I like to order from there, and I love Thai food.
Perfect. Yeah.
So we've had lunch. Should we do afternoon coffee?
Sure. Yeah. That sounds good.
Okay, cool. There are a few cafes in Fort Greene that I'm able to recommend to any coffee fanatics. I personally am a coffee fanatic. So there is a cafe called Hungry Ghost at the end of South Oxford Street and Fulton. So that's a great neighborhood cafe. After kind of like 6 p.m., they also have beer. They have it for takeaway. They have a cool bench out front. And if that isn't for you, there's also a coffee bean and tea leaf that's new to the neighborhood. So that's been kind of exciting to just have like a new coffee place. They have a backyard and a front yard because everything here has outdoor seating now. So there are loads of places to sit outside with your coffee, which I am all about.
Nice.
Coffee should be had outdoors. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now we're all caffeinated up, ready for more.
Yep. Okay. But we have to make sure to hydrate. So everyone should be having water. So Fort Greene is another beautiful area where we'll be walking. And it is here that we can go to my neighborhood park, Fort Greene Park, where, as I mentioned, you can see people doing all types of things, from walking their dogs to walking their babies to doing yoga. There are tennis courts. So if you have your racket, if you're a big tennis fan, you can play tennis in Fort Greene Park. A lot of fun. And you can also do some nature walking or trail running because there is a perimeter trail that is dirt and it goes around the perimeter of the park, which is about 4 square blocks. And you can get a run in the middle of the day if you want.
Nice. That's what you've been doing a lot of, right?
Yeah, I tend to not get too much speed when I do this particular trail because it's in a circle. So I prefer to run to the bridges or kind of just through the neighborhood. But it's a fair thing to do if you want that experience.
All right. So at this point, we've already spent a solid chunk of time sightseeing in Brooklyn's neighborhoods, taking it all in, biking, eating, running. Let's continue on with our day.
Great. So now we have a bit of a walk to do. Actually, if we want to get back on our bikes, we can do that. We should be staying in bike lanes for safety. And we're going to go to Prospect Park, which is it's one of the largest parks in New York. Again, it was designed by the same architects who designed Central Park in Manhattan, which everyone has seen in the movies. So this park has a lot of what you might call Central Park vibes. I mean, they really put everything in this park. There's a zoo, there's the botanical garden, there are these beautiful archways that actually kind of fell into disrepair, and they just redid one of them at the end of 2020, I think it was, and they've restored it to its grandeur of like the late 1800s. So it's gorgeous inside. Usually you'll see people picnicking in Prospect Park. There is a 3.2, I think, mile loop that goes through the park, and that's for running and biking. And then where I'm going to take you is a secret, and this is that Prospect Park has New York City's largest forest. So it's actually New York's only forest. It's a proper forest, and in the center of the park, it's it's called a forest because it qualifies in some way. There are waterfalls, there are tall trees, and actually,
What?
if you look up, you cannot see any other buildings. So this is my secret that I'm bestowing upon you. And if you Google Prospect Park hiking, there are proper hiking trails in this park that there are some that are like easy to get to, and there are some that are harder to get to, where I took my husband for his birthday as a surprise trip. And you can climb to like the highest point in Prospect Park. I don't remember there being much of a view, but we did do it. So I can say I've been to the highest point and I have hiked there. So we have to make sure we're wearing really good shoes for this, but this is my treat to everyone that we're going hiking in Brooklyn.
Yeah, nice. I don't think I ever did that. I don't think I knew about that.
Many people who live here don't know about this.
Yeah, I believe it. Do you have a favorite one of those trails you've ever done, or just go and look online and pick any of them?
I would say go and look online. Honestly, I like going to Prospect Park and trying to get lost because it's a big place. And I think the joy of doing something like that in the biggest city in the United States is saying, like, I have the opportunity to get lost in, Greenery right now. Just put your phone in your pocket, try to get lost. Another really cool thing about Prospect Park is that there are proper lakes. I'm not sure if they're man-made. They probably are because the whole park is kind of designed architecturally and stuff like that. But you can find wildlife in Prospect Park. And if you look that up, you'll see there are like 3 species of turtles and like 26 species of birds. I'm making this up. I could reference the actual numbers, but I think I've seen a rabbit there. I've definitely seen turtles. I've seen some cool insects and birds and maybe some small mammals, squirrels for sure. But you can go birding and you can go wildlife looking in Prospect Park.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then the lakes, are those the lakes we can rent any kind of boat and go on, or are they just to look at?
There are some boat rentals, paddle boats. I've never done it. I've done it in Central Park. So if you are hopping into Manhattan on this trip, you can definitely go boating there. But I think that our travelers should try to rent boats in Prospect Park.
All right. Well, was there anything else you wanted to pack in our day before dinner and winding down?
Yeah, well, so before we get to actual dinner, we have to walk there. So as I mentioned, Prospect Park is pretty big. So by the time you decide you want to leave, then you have to figure out how to leave. And then you have to calculate the time it's going to take you to actually get back to the streets. So what we should do is we can walk past the baseball fields where, you can watch people playing baseball. And you'll also probably see people barbecuing, which means you'll probably be getting hungry. And we're going to exit on 9th Street at Prospect Park West, and we can walk straight into the beautiful neighborhood of Park Slope, which is also historic. There's a lot of history there that I won't rattle off right now, but fun fact is that Obama lived in Park Slope, I think in the early 2000s or the 90s. So many famous people have lived in the neighborhood of Park Slope, and it's beautiful. It is young, it's trendy, it has a lot of shopping. Fifth Avenue is where kind of like everything goes on. And what we can do is we can grab a drink, we can get happy hour, and then we can dine at really any of the many, many restaurants there, depending if you want Mexican food or Italian food or Vietnamese food or American food. There's also Jamaican food. There's everything under the sun there. And what's cool is that if you go this year, but I mean, hopefully in the future, is they've closed a lot of Fifth Avenue, the main thoroughfare, into a pedestrian street. And all of the restaurants, bars, and cafes have outdoor seating in the street. And sometimes there's even live music. So it kind of feels like a neighborhood street fair. And that is where we can spend the rest of our evening before heading in for the night.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. I love that came out of COVID.
Yeah, right.
Do you have any spots that you want to give a shout out to? Any really good dinner, really good bars?
Yeah, I'm going to throw down 2 of my husband's favorite places. His favorite bar is a dive called Uncle Barry's. And I like that place because they also have gluten-free beer for all of our gluten-free friends. They do carry some cool gluten-free options. Other than that, they have lots of craft beers, local beers. They can mix you up anything you want. And they have some fun like dart throwing in the back, but there's also outdoor seating for now. And a go-to place for a bite is a place called Nacho Macho Taco. And that's where we'll get tacos or a burrito, or that's a quick place where you can get something. And as I mentioned, everywhere has outdoor seating right now, even into the colder months. So you'll always be spending time outside, and you don't have to spend a ton of money to enjoy yourself with food and drink in New York.
Oh, awesome. Always love a good gluten-free dive bar suggestion, especially with darts. So, best Instagram spots or picture spots. I know you told us a few actually scattered throughout the interview, but was there anything else?
So yes, I'm thinking of all the Instagrams I take, and I tend to go back to the same spots over and over again. I will disclose them to you. There are three. They might seem a little bit overdone, but the first is Brooklyn Heights Promenade, where you can see the sunset next to the city. There's a clear view of the Statue of Liberty. It's a place to take a panorama. It can't be missed. That's the Brooklyn Heights Promenade, accessible from Brooklyn Heights. The second is that classic shot on the Brooklyn Bridge. You want to get right in the center, watch out for bikers, watch out for runners, but you want to kind of get there a little before sunset so that it's not too dark, and then take that centered shot of the two kind of like gateways of the bridge, and you can't go wrong. My third spot, it's actually Grand Army Plaza, which is kind of like the entranceway to Prospect Park. And there's a beautiful arch that looks like the Arc de Triomphe from Paris. And that's a beautiful spot. There's a fountain, there's an oval that the traffic goes around it, but inside it's like a teeny little park with a fountain. And then you have this big, beautiful white stone arch. So these are some beautiful landmarks, not to be missed. Again, totally free. You don't have to spend any money to enjoy yourself at all of these places. So yeah, these are my best tips for everybody.
Perfect. Yeah, I definitely can picture instantly the second one you mentioned, the bridge. I can picture that on Instagram right now. Okay, I'm hoping you have a answer for this one. Overrated. Is there anything that like we're going to Google, everything online is going to tell us to go there when we're in Brooklyn, but no, we should not be spending our time there?
I would say the things that fall into that category are anywhere where you're spending more money to eat than you're comfortable with, because food in Brooklyn comes at so many different types of budgets. If you're on a wait list for a restaurant, or if you're dying to eat at a top 10 type of place and it's going to break your daily budget, don't do it, because you can get a slice of pizza for $1 and it's going to be great. And you can get, tacos in some neighborhood that might not be the it neighborhood, but it's a authentic neighborhood. And you won't spend more than $10, and just in cash. So for anyone who is daunted by the idea of being in New York and having to spend a lot of money, there are so many ways to eat really well and have a great time and have an authentic experience without even, taking more than a 10 out of your wallet. So that's what I would say.
Okay, great. I thought that was a really good answer. I like that. Why Brooklyn over the other boroughs if we're looking for stuff to be doing outdoors? Why should we be choosing that borough?
I love that question. I think because Brooklyn has a bit more space than Manhattan, and there is a lot more to see while you're doing outdoor stuff than in the other boroughs, just because of the waterline. Brooklyn, as you might see on a map, has a lot of coast. I mean, it's surrounded by a few rivers, and inside, even as I mentioned, there's lakes in Prospect Park. So I think the fact that you can have land and water at one time makes being here really special. Okay.
And your best sales pitch to everyone. You love outdoors, come to Brooklyn. Give us that.
I don't know. Let's have some mystery. I'll say, if you don't come to Brooklyn, you won't know what you're missing.
Perfect. All right. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about how we can find out more about you?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram at half-half-travel, which is an account I share with my husband where we have documented a lot of our travel photos in a unique way that you can check out. That's half, H-A-L-F, and then half, H-A-L-F, and then travel. So half-half-travel. And also, if you want to check out a few of the itineraries we have for Brooklyn, you can find them on our website, halfhalftravel.com. where if you go to our travel section and our destinations, you can see some of the local tips that we've listed, especially for Brooklyn Heights and Brooklyn Bridge Park, which I mentioned in this episode.
Great. Okay, I'll get those links as well, and we'll make sure they're in the show notes.
Perfect.
All right. Well, this has been great. I love all these ideas, and you really made a day in Brooklyn outdoors seem possible. I appreciate it.
You got it. This was great. This was so fun. I hope everyone's going to visit and let me know when they do.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining me.
You got it.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Once again, if you want to grab the show notes for this episode, head on over to localsknowbestpodcast.com/20. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you'd leave a review in Apple Podcasts and let me know what your favorite part was. Make sure to check out the Instagram post for this episode over at our new account, Locals Know Best Podcast, and please feel free to share this episode with your favorite travel buddy. Thanks so much. Catch you next time on Locals Know Best.